Hello and welcome to Wake Up Our Faith. This is the show where passion, purpose, and dreaming big challenge common sense. We like to think of it as a conversation to shed light on the upside of upside down living. Matt Ham and Kevin Adams with you, as every Wednesday right here in the Standard Glass Studios at Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7 FM. Many thanks to Nick Craig in the booth today helping us produce the show. Want to thank you guys for tuning in, jumping on here. We are live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter every Wednesday from 1 to 3 p.m. First hour focuses on faith topics and navigating life between Sundays. The second hour is dedicated to focusing on that in a business context or business environment. The show is podcast to iTunes as well. Wake Up Our Faith for lots and lots of archived episodes. Our corporate partners make this show possible. We're grateful for them. We want to kick off by recognizing and thanking Freeman Landscaping. They are the largest privately owned land and irrigation firm in eastern North Carolina, family owned and operated since 1992. They offer both commercial and residential landscaping and irrigation. Feel free to give them a call, 910-796-1166. Mr. Adams. Introductions aside.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, buddy.
Good afternoon to you too. Thank you. Got to clear the pipes a little bit here. Been kind of sick, so not out of the fever, contagious stuff, but definitely still congested. So I got peppermint gum, and it's just some ugly stuff coming out of me, whether it's congestion or smacking, so please bear with me.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for bearing with it. I'm glad to see you out and about.
Yeah,
because I know for a few days you're kind of locked and loaded.
Yeah,
diffusers and oils and hot compresses. I always get this picture of in the Disney cartoons, Goofy. For some reason, Goofy always had that like water bag, the hot water bag.
Yeah,
he like placed it on his head and he was like walking around with the sniffles. So it's a real thing this time of year for sure.
Right on.
Absolutely, for sure. Well, man, last week's show, for those who missed it, you can go back and check it out on the podcast. It was just a fantastic conversation about authentic biblical leadership, what it looks like, some things to recognize. We want to kind of parlay off of that into a specific area of struggle and challenge for a lot of folks. Kev, I personally love what we get to do, and I know that you do as well. There's no greater honor than walking with someone and helping them discover who it is that God created them to be, to begin to break free of strongholds and then live out His goodness in the world. Mm-hmm. And one of the painful things, however, is the fact that so many people don't come to us until they get to that point of absolute brokenness and pain.
Right.
And it's an honor, again, to walk with them through those painful moments. But you're dealing with divorce, you're dealing with addictions, infidelity, all of these different things that people navigate. But one of them can be boiled down into a word, and that word is betrayal. Mm-hmm. And that's something we see in Scripture, of course. It's very real for us. But this is a big topic that a lot of people struggle with, but a topic that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about in a healthy context. So that's kind of the heart of where we want to go today. Yeah,
that's right. It's a big, heavy word. It's kind of like it's almost Old English, betrayal. You think of Robin Hood and, so-and-so undermined so-and-so and took over their kingdom or whatever. But, let's look at it from micro to macro, and really touch what the heart of it is and how to deal with it. So defining it in different levels, and then how to see it coming a little bit.
Yeah,
and then also if you've been on that side of it, and whether on purpose or accidentally or whatever. So there's a lot to it.
Whether you did the betraying or you felt betrayed.
Yeah, and it's not something you can't come back from, on that side of it. But I think the main focus is just to look at it and really bring it into the light instead of just keeping it in the movies, and
Yeah.
then it just happens in people's lives and destroys lives, relationships, etc.
I think about, you mentioned Robin Hood, and I was thinking about two movie scenarios jumped off the page in my mind. One of them is the movie The 300, which is about the Spartans and the Greek, back in the day. And they were betrayed by one of their own who was not allowed to fight, and he kind of gave their position away, and it exposed the men. And then I think about the movie The Matrix, when I can't think of the character's name, but he was the guy in the Goonies is all I remember, who betrayed Neo and kind of this group of people, and gave away their positioning and kind of left them out stranded. And like you said, it's not just a movie thing. And more importantly, it's actually something that people from a Christian mindset struggle with in relation to pastors, churches, Christian relationships, friendships. And what it does is it attempts to kind of give God a black eye, and somehow put that on him. And so I'm really glad we're talking about it, because that's not essentially what's going on at all. It's a tool of the enemy that I think we need to be aware of. So you mentioned defining it first. So let's start there.
Yeah, well, we talked about some different traits of leadership last week. One of those was there was obvious and less obvious. We kind of categorized them kind of like a ship. Above the water you see, and below the water there's the keel and all that. So you got that going on. But so we'll start with one of the above the water line, and that is integrity. And again, you can define integrity a lot of ways, some very simple ways. But the way we've looked at it in this is integrity is doing what you say. So when you look at the potential downside of not doing what you say, in other words, I'll be there at a certain time, and let's put a buffer in there because there's problems and stuff, and it's okay to be late or whatever. It's not okay to not show up at all, or to set up a meeting with somebody and to just not engage it.
Yeah.
So that's a real small level of a form of not doing what you say, which the result is a micro betrayal.
Yes.
And it hurts. It disrespects the other person, etc. On a major level, I mean, obviously you got Jesus, that's kind of the top of the heap, but let's talk kind of down to earth a little bit about it. You've got things where you have marital infidelity, you have business dealings where someone trades their stock or whatever. You do things that are under the table, I guess. In other words, it's not, people are not doing what they're showing other people, and there's a relationship involved. See, there's no betrayal without relationship.
That's a key. That's a key first. There's no betrayal without relationship. Keep going.
So well, you got that's just a spectrum, a big picture and a micro picture. In earthly terms, I mean, we can talk all day about Jesus and Peter and, the big betrayer, and Peter was the little betrayer, and he came back from it, right? But anyway, that's great, and that's kind of something that we can get into. But relationships right here, right now, daily, look like what I was describing. So anyway, that's sort of a way to define it, feel it, understand it.
Yeah. The key to me here is walking away with this, at least grabbing hold of it, is that betrayal does not happen outside of the context of a relationship. So you're dealing with people, which is why it's so incredibly important for us to be reminded of that, because people are involved. That means emotions are involved, feelings are involved, and these types of things. And when that's involved, it has impact. Right. It has great impact.
Yeah.
And so we've gone from micro of, not showing up for a meeting, and then on the big side of this, I mean, I think like a Bernie Madoff or, Enron or some of these global things of, we're presenting this thing that this is for the benefit of all, but deceitfully we're behind the scenes, we're betraying everyone for our own gain.
Right, yeah. So we know what it feels like I think it's honestly it's probably the most painful thing. And let's go to Jesus for a second. Of all the physical things he endured, betrayal has got to be one of the most emotionally draining, difficult things. And of course, we know how he handled it. So that's our model. But it's real easy to just go there, leave it there, and go, be like Jesus. All right, show's done. So,
right.
We'll come back and dig into it.
Yeah, we want to push in beneath the surface, and that's what we do here on Wake Up Our Faith. Matt Ham and Kevin Adams, we're going to take a short break. Always want to encourage you to check out the Portable Faith community. It's how we stay connected with folks between Sundays. WakeUpMyFaith.com. Check it out. Dive in. We'll be back right after this. Hello and welcome back to Wake Up Our Faith. This is the show where passion, purpose, and dreaming big challenge common sense. We like to think of it as a conversation to shed light on the upside of upside down living. Matt Ham, Kevin Adams with you every single Wednesday in studio. The show is rebroadcast every Sunday on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7 FM. We appreciate you tuning in however that may occur. Encourage you to check out the podcast, which is the archive on iTunes at Wake Up Our Faith. Our corporate partners make this show possible. We're certainly grateful for them, want to recognize them. One of those being the Honeycutt Group. This is an insurance brokerage firm right here in Wilmington, North Carolina. More than 10 years in the business, family owned and operated. These folks are great, great competitive rates, good customer service, give them a call, the Honeycutt Group, for any of your insurance needs, 910-338-1773. Kev, today's topic is a powerful one. It's an important one. It's one that is not talked a lot about in culture because it's hard. But that is betrayal.
Yeah.
And, the surface level for Christians is like, well, Jesus was betrayed, and look at how he handled it. Just be more like Jesus.
I like that sort of country fried chicken version there.
Just be more like Jesus.
I think it's a new character for you, man.
It might be. It might be.
Does this guy live in the cabin or, down under the dock?
No, well, I don't think in the cabin or the dock. He's a bit in the country, right?
Yeah.
He's a bit in the country, but he's probably got him a farm somewhere.
He sounds very kind.
He lives on land. He is. He's nice.
Not smart.
He's nice. No, it's. I think that we take these issues like betrayal and we go, oh well, Jesus was betrayed, so just deal with it the way he did. He washed Judas's feet. Right before he betrayed. So go wash your betrayer's feet. And yet when someone in power or a position of power, when betrayal happens. We just lambaste these people in public, if it's a celebrity type or if it's a pastor or something like that, it gets to be really, really ugly. And so we've talked about the micro versions of this up to the macro versions, but let's continue to press in, because if we do not know how to healthily navigate this concept of betrayal, we will miss out on an opportunity to literally be good news to people in the midst of these circumstances.
Yeah. Well, I think, part of our process is learning how to identify and overcome your own strongholds, and then learn how to navigate the strongholds of others. So it's not just some dark heart that creates an environment or a minefield for betrayal. So sometimes our maturity has to overlook the immaturity of others. And that's why I believe that, personally, from start to finish, betrayal is really the greatest test of compassion, because it's the hardest thing, one of the hardest things to forgive and overcome. So, for instance, in marital infidelity, let's just throw out all the different definitions of that, emotional, physical, whatever. There's something really special about that relationship that speaks to people and speaks to God, and that's why He calls us His bride and His spouse and all that kind of stuff. So ultimately, if you look at that, what you see is there's one of the deepest types of relationships. So when that is broken, does that mean that the person who engaged it first is just evil and horrible and needs to be thrown out with the trash? And when we look at Jesus, we see that He did not do that. So Jesus had compassion, and He did it over and over again. And probably the more general way is forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Right.
And Stephen, basically said the same thing when he was murdered, as Paul stood there and watched. So anyway, that's just the first step is recognizing that what it is, what it feels like, what it looks like in a big way, in a very detrimental way in real life, and then turning it into an opportunity.
So Kevin, how do we navigate?
Compassion.
Sure, and I'm gonna push back against that, because sometimes there is evil intent in it. Sometimes there is and I think discerning the difference is key, because there are people who they don't care. I'm doing what I'm doing, and it's ill-willed from the very beginning. I'm going to take advantage of you, and I'm going to be, infidelity, whatever, do it again, that kind of thing, versus a repentant heart. And
sure.
And I think both need compassion. I'm not suggesting they don't. That's always the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't say that I just said we can't throw the whole thing out. I didn't say that it doesn't come from evil. I said it doesn't necessarily.
Right.
And we're just going around to different views of it so we can get a big picture. So yeah, but I mean, you're right. It ultimately it comes from an evil spirit.
Yes.
So the core of it is just like Peter didn't want Jesus to be crucified. Well, his heart was in the right place, but the enemy was using him by trying to undo God's will. And Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan." He wasn't talking to Peter. He was talking through Peter to the enemy that was using him as a tool. So, I'm just trying to dissect it and put it in perspective. And I used marriage, and when you're talking about marriage, you're talking about something God's bound together. So the tendency of our flesh is to go immediately, that evil person,
yes,
look
exactly.
what they did to me. So I'm going to the harder place first, and that's sort of where I was coming from. But yeah, I mean, straight up, it is evil.
Yeah, and well, the flip side of that is to go, I think what you're saying, what I'm saying is the same thing, is that culture tends to go, like you just said, that
I just
evil
wanted
person.
to clarify that I wasn't saying it wasn't from evil.
Yeah. And I think we have a responsibility to pause in those moments and to use compassion.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what I'm saying underneath that is that there is discernment that comes from the Holy Spirit to know when someone is not repentant and is abusive or kind of illegitimately taking advantage. And so just to kind of circle that whole wagon on the idea, it's important because it does give us the opportunity for compassion.
Well, yeah, and that's the key in this. If you are enduring or have experienced a form of betrayal. I mean, look, if you meet with somebody, and this happens to me and you, especially me in the one-on-one meetings, a lot of times I'll spend 20 hours with somebody just pouring my heart out to help them, and it just goes by the wayside. They don't care. It's like they have the maturity to see that they need it, but they don't have the maturity to step in and overcome the obstacles. So that takes a lot of pain usually, but we don't throw it out, but it's difficult to deal with. So that's one thing. But then you've got, someone in a business, let's say a doctor who owns part of a medical supply company, and you got this weird conflict of interest going on, and they're putting these parts in people, and maybe they're defective. I mean, think about that. That just comes straight from greed.
Yeah.
So we need to get below all of the circumstances and talk about, where does it come from? How is it defined through the conscience, the spirit, et cetera?
I think the key for me is that as I'm navigating this with you kind of in the moment is having the immediate maturity to pause and not see the evil and understand that the enemy is actively at work gives you the ability to hear from the Holy Spirit, to let discernment speak. And that's where a lot of people don't go because they go, well, that just hurts too bad. Or, how could I? They're rationalizing it all from their mind, from the soul, instead of using it as an opportunity to pause and give God latitude to speak. And I think that's the key takeaway when someone's faced with a betrayal situation is a key kind of first step. Right.
The greatest form of detriment, I guess, like betrayal. The flip side of that is also the greatest opportunity. And we see that Jesus, again, had he not been betrayed, we're talking about Judas now, would we be saved?
Yeah.
And it's not saying, and even Paul addressed this, it's not a license to sin, grace, and all that. But we do see that, without the canyon of darkness, light doesn't have the same effect. So anyway, I know I'm getting off into deeper things, but the point is betrayal is something we have to learn how to engage and encounter and deal with properly, and we can turn it into an opportunity.
Yeah. And I love the kind of takeaway from this segment for me is that it is our greatest opportunity for compassion.
Yeah.
Jesus modeled that. We get to live it out, and that's what we're going to press into in the next segments. Amen,
brother.
You're listening to and watching Wake Up Our Faith. Matt Ham and Kevin Adams back right after this. Hello and welcome back to Wake Up Our Faith. This is the show where passion, purpose, and dreaming big challenge common sense. We like to think of it as a conversation to shed light on the upside of upside down living. Matt Hand and Kevin Adams in studio today, Wilmington's big talker, the Standard Glass studio to be exact. Many thanks to Jack Andrews and the team at Standard Glass for making the studio here possible. We are just glad that you've joined us today on this wonderful Wednesday, hump day, middle of the week here in Wilmington, North Carolina. Our corporate partners are those that make this show possible. We want to recognize and thank them, one of those being Physical Therapy Services of Wilmington, on the web at PT Services of Wilmington, serving southeastern North Carolina since 1983, family owned and operated with more than 100 years of experience in the office there. Feel free to give them a call if you have any needs recovering from injury or navigating some injuries. 910-763-8286. Kev, today's show is all about a very important topic, that is betrayal. It's a topic that a lot of folks struggle with because it's happened to them. Maybe it has something that they have initiated, but if it's not managed healthfully, it creates kind of a crippled version of ourselves.
Right.
And I have this picture of someone who has been betrayed, so they never love again. They never grow into who they were meant to be. They never use that betrayal as an opportunity, like we mentioned in the last segment, to extend compassion, to grow beyond it. As you said, it was Judas's betrayal that eventually led us to be saved. So kind of understanding how to recognize betrayal, how to manage it, and even how to prepare for it or recognize some things that may be coming. That's where we want to go next.
Yeah, and his betrayal didn't cause us to be saved. Just to be clear, it is the context or the setting or the stage for that to happen. And we see that in Scripture. God hardened Pharaoh's heart, etc. And it seems paradoxical, but it is part of it. Wheat and tares, all that kind of stuff. So the first thing to do when you understand betrayal from micro to macro is recognize that it's an opportunity. Now that can be very difficult. On one side of it, we use the example of marital or business environment. You have to understand that God can take the depth of painful significance and make it that much of an opportunity for you.
Yeah.
And that's what he's into. That's what he does.
Right.
So you start by recognizing that truth, flipping it over, not allowing the enemy to work through it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you agree. It doesn't mean you become a doormat.
Yes.
At all. And, you're not allowing that. It doesn't mean you even continue the relationship necessarily. So, but flipping it over, seeing the opportunity. Peter did that. Judas did not. And that's the main difference. And, look, Peter became one of the greatest human beings that ever lived because he stepped into the opportunity. That makes sense.
And the thing to me is that betrayal may in fact present the greatest opportunity for you to experience the character of God.
Yeah.
If you're willing
Sure.
to be humble enough in the moment to let him speak in it. One of the most powerful things that's been said on this show is you said maturity often overlooks the immaturity of others. And that's something where someone who's in a painful moment wants to go, yeah, well, they don't deserve it. Or, it's this vindication thing.
All stronghold garbage.
Absolutely. That's the important
Muscle
piece.
memory, rote behavior that comes from pain, childhood, all kind of crap. People don't know how to get out of that. So they just keep doing it. But yeah, so getting through that is 2 or 3 shows within itself. But looking at it, what does this thing look like? Where does it have to come from? So we'll look at 2 things. We'll look at how do you see it coming, not to protect yourself necessarily, but to understand the whole of it, not only the opportunity, but maybe to go the other way because you don't want to embrace it either.
You don't want to set yourself up to be, handicapped either. I mean, if you're starting to be aware and mindful of things that are going on around you, they add up. And I think you always see that in these cataclysmic moments for people. It's like, well, I just came out of the blue. It didn't come out of the blue. Stuff was happening.
Yeah,
you just didn't pay attention to it because you weren't willing to be honest and aware. So for someone who's navigating kind of a relationship in their own life, what are some things to be cognizant of, some things to be aware of as it relates to betrayal?
Well, last week we talked more in depth about power versus authority. And Hitler had power, but no godly authority. Now, look, we can get into the whole debate, God appoints leaders and all that, but just look at this for the basic of it. God wasn't supportive of Hitler, right? Because that was evil. So there's power. And then we talked about the police officer who may not even have a gun or whatever and can just stand in the road with their hand and stop flying hunks of metal cars just by putting their hand up. All right, that's authority. And that brings power. So there's the context of the next step here. So you look at it this way, back into that context, betrayal, which is ultimately self-seeking, seeks power.
Yes.
The greatest aphrodisiac for man's will is power. Money and fame, all that, ultimately it's power. And that's what people are after, who are hoarding and grabbing hold and not Christ-like. Compassion, on the other hand, seeks authority. And so that's why we see Jesus being compassionate in the worst type of betrayal there is. So if we want to be like Jesus, the very first thing, aside from pausing, understanding it, listening, getting close to God, is to engage compassion.
Yes. Hold on. I want to repeat this for my own self to be able to digest it, and for our listeners too here, because this is so key. As it ties in to the conversation about power and authority, people who are in power, betrayal is the byproduct of people seeking power, whereas compassion is the byproduct of people seeking authority.
Right.
People in positions of authority are willing to be compassionate. People in places of power are rarely willing to be compassionate. They're looking to take power and to leverage that and betray whatever because it's about the self. That's so huge to me, because we begin to start navigating life and the circumstances, relationships, people. If you're around someone who's seeking power, beware, because betrayal is usually close at hand.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and so that can be a general statement, which I agree with. But if we want to get, and we can tap back into our show last week. If you haven't heard it, go back and listen to it, and this will even make more sense. But we want to start looking at some of the traits, and we looked at those traits. I mentioned them in the very first part of this show. There's obvious ones, courage. We talked about that, integrity. Then the ones that are not so obvious that leaders have. And we're talking about Christ-like modeled leaders. Empathy, vulnerability, and humility. So flipping that around, when you don't see those things, and you can feel that. When you have those things and you don't see them, you can feel it. Not just notice a weird behavior. You can start to feel it. So I don't know how much we got, a couple of minutes here, I guess. But anyway, so talking through those things, understanding what they are from a place of absence, like I'm expecting this relationship, which is hunky-dory and good on the surface, to ultimately have those three things: empathy, vulnerability, and humility. And if they don't, watch out. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So when you look to people in positions of authority, we call it authority. It's really power, and they lack empathy, they lack vulnerability, and they lack humility. They're living from that place of power, and what's close at hand generally is the opportunity for betrayal. Is that what we're saying?
Well, yeah, and we can we can let go of the power and the authority thing. I just wanted to bring that back into the leadership idea that we're all called to it. And here's some things, and it helps separate it. But let's just look at it from a relational point, because we're talking about betrayal ultimately here. Mm-hmm. And so, what is it? What do you do with it when it happens? What happens when you've done it? And then ultimately down to, we got a few seconds here. What does it look like when these things are absent of a relationship? So not necessarily about the big power and authority thing, which that's there, but just in your relationships, because that's really what this boils down to.
Yeah, whether it's friendships, somebody you work with, whatever.
Yeah.
Be aware of those relationships exhibiting empathy, vulnerability, and humility.
Yeah, we'll talk about that here when we come back.
Guys, short break. Matt Ham and Kevin Adams, thanks for joining us on Wake Up Our Faith. We'll be back for more right after this. Hello and welcome back to Wake Up Our Faith. This is the show where passion, purpose, and dreaming big challenge common sense. We like to think of it as a conversation to shed light on the upside of upside down living. Matt Ham, Kevin Adams, navigating this wonderful Wednesday with you here, live streaming on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Appreciate those of you who are jumping on live, sharing this out in your communities. having a great conversation today about a topic that I think a lot of people avoid because it's a difficult one, but it's necessary if we want to begin to step into this life that Christ has called us to, this life between Sundays that is a kingdom-minded lifestyle, and that is navigating betrayal. Before we dive into the final segment in the first hour here, I want to recognize Dr. Greg Veman and the folks at Seacoast Skin Surgery. Dr. Veman also has a ministry called Everlasting Strength. Whether you're looking for Dr. Veman to operate on you, do some skin surgery, or whether you're looking for his ministry, interest in his ministry, you can reach out at 910-256-2100. Many thanks to Dr. Veman and his team. So Kev, before we broke, we talked about betrayal and being aware of betrayal, usually coming from people in relationship with us who lack empathy, vulnerability, and humility. Mm-hmm. So let's kind of pick up where we left off there.
Yeah, well, it doesn't mean that in a moment or two here or there, if someone fails to have empathy or to be vulnerable, or even humble. We all have moments where we have failures. I think the more mature we are and the more we grow, we start to see our life as this mosaic of maturity, and you can kind of back off and you can rest in who you are and all that. So that said, that's the disclaimer. But generally, when you are in a relationship, this is just practical advice, and that relationship seems to be budding and doing well, and there's a mutual trade-off. When you start to, how the computer programs get a glitch, and you'll start seeing them, it doesn't quite work. Or they're one-trick ponies, and they start saying the same stuff over and over again because there is nothing else. Mm-hmm. These are all things that you can recognize, but those are just behaviors. Underneath what you see is lack of empathy. In other words, if you're going through something, and this happens over and over, it's not just a random bad day for somebody, and they don't show empathy.
Yeah. It's that whole thing of like, hey, man, don't bring your problems to work. We all got problems, okay?
Sure.
We all got problems. You got job to do here, man.
That sounds like another character.
Don't bring that stuff to work, man.
Yeah, right. But it's in churches and in business and in homes. It's everywhere. But empathy, real empathy, is very Christ-like. It doesn't mean we all do a great job at it. If you got a head cold, and it's sometimes you're not hearing what they're saying. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this repetitive thing. So when you're looking for look, we don't need to we don't expect it. It's just be aware of it. This is one of those things. If someone never shows empathy, you and I in our circle have a lot of really incredible people. And I can't think of one of them that doesn't ask, how are you doing, once in a while. And if you tell them, then they want to know more.
Yeah.
They don't flip it around. They don't ignore it and go happy time.
Yeah, it's not like a competitive thing for them.
Yeah. So that's a big one to look out for. When you never see that, that's one red flag, and a step toward look for a betrayal.
Yeah.
If you put too much expectation into that relationship, that's one thing. So we can move on. Yeah. I didn't know if you wanted to.
No, I'm sitting here. God's laughing with me, just reminding me of just various things I've been through personally, and in hindsight now, going, man, you idiot, you didn't see this coming. Because there was genuinely a lack of empathy, and you're throwing all your cards in that basket, and next thing you know, this person steps on you, and for their own gain, and you realize that. I remember one vividly now that hurt very, very early on in my career, where I was betrayed by someone in a private conversation. We were talking about a situation, and I voiced some concern about the situation. And they used that language, went back to the other party, and just completely threw me under the bus. But the purpose was for them to look good and to gain leverage, because we were in a competitive kind of sales environment.
Sure.
They used that to gain a benefit for themselves.
Yeah.
And I was the one who left holding the bag. And I'm sitting here going, wait a second. We were in a private conversation. You're sharing information with me. We're just having an honest discussion. It wasn't belittling or bad-mouthing this person. We were talking about our concerns. Well, you go behind my back over here and throw me under the bus.
Right.
And it eventually led to me leaving that job. I mean, I left that career.
Yeah.
And, you know, and that person, I guess, got what they wanted because they were the next in line or whatnot, you know. But I'm thinking back and going, wow, man, never did that individual here ask me, how are you doing, man? What's going on with you?
Yeah.
And genuinely mean it.
Yeah. Well, and see, that's the thing is betrayal, it sears the conscience. It quenches the spirit. Now, God says that he dwells within our spirit. That's where he lives in us when he says, I'll never leave you or forsake you. So we need to act on things that I'm put my glasses on because I can't even read my own writing, but things that enthrone. I used the word enthrone in my notes earlier. Enthrones the Spirit. The Spirit's what needs to lead. And Romans says, those who are led by the Spirit, these are the sons of God. So our conscience is our spirit. We can call it the gut or whatever you want, but that's where God's voice is. So anyway, all that said, that there's a empathy or lack thereof comes from a place, and you can recognize it. Doesn't mean you throw out the person, but it means, you know, be alert. Be alert. That's one, and then there's a couple more.
Yeah,
so,
and we've got a few minutes before we break here, and of course these are topics that kind of flow in and out of shows or whatnot.
Yeah,
but let's focus on
work through them real quick.
So vulnerability.
Yeah, so vulnerability, same kind of idea. It comes from the Spirit. If someone is not willing to share their failures with you, it doesn't mean you got to spill your guts in the lobby to everybody or take over the conversation. It means when someone is hurting and you've had failures, it helps them identify with you and it encourages them. It keeps you eye level. So if someone does not do that, then that means they're really going after their pedestal.
Yes.
And they don't want you to see their failures. That's not like Jesus. So that you see that lack of empathy, and then humility. See how we're doing. We got
2 minutes.
So humility is another one. I mean, go ahead and jump in.
No, I love the idea about sharing your shortcomings. So many people in positions of power or in relational struggles of the wanting to maintain power, they're not willing to admit their failures. This is especially true in marriages, especially when there's an infidelity situation and one person brought the infidelity. The other person goes, well, I didn't do anything. Whoa. You've got to be honest that there were things that you did that fostered an environment for this to happen.
Yeah.
And that is a place of a willingness, of vulnerability. And I think it leads right into humility as well, is a recognition of where the other person is and kind of your involvement or your contribution to a situation.
Right. So lack of empathy, lack of vulnerability, you're starting to stack up here. You're stacking up a recipe for betrayal. And so just be aware of those things when you go into a relationship at some point. Humility is the third one. Humility, really the way we've defined it in this context is really pointing your lens exclusively on the needs of others. In other words, you can go there. I can focus on you and your need, and actually gives me a lot more joy than focusing on my need. So humility is focusing on the needs or whatever that other people that you can give to them without anything in return.
Expecting,
completely free and joyful. So if someone never does that or doesn't typically go there, empathy, vulnerability, or is willing to take a minute and focus on you, and you
Yeah.
You look out for it.
And there's a twofold challenge, not only being aware of this in other relationships from other people, but also in our own heart, is are we cultivating an environment?
Yeah, and sorry, I just want to throw this in, but Peter addressed all those things, and he went from the negative to empathy, vulnerability, and humility.
Yeah.
Think about when Jesus looked at him.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry.
That's the growth. Well, guys, thanks so much for joining us in the first hour. Coming back for a second hour on Faith in Business. You're watching and listening to Wake Up Our Faith. Hello and welcome back to Wake Up Our Faith. Matt Ham and Kevin Adams kicking off the second hour here in the Standard Glass Studios. For our regular listeners, you know that we're in a new format now. The second hour of the show is dedicated to faith in business. Our heart is to speak very plainly and clearly about how to integrate, navigate faith into your business life, into your work week. Last week's show was the first installment of that. We've talked about it before, Kev. We know that. But last week was kind of entering that new format, and we really laid out kind of why this is important. Business is where we spend our time. It's where we are. It's our greatest opportunity to engage with people, so we daggum sure better be exemplifying Christ in that.
Yeah.
And it ties into what we're talking about in the other, in our first hour too, with betrayal and how to navigate that, because we have to have this level of integrity in our work week and in our businesses if we want to be the good news to people. So we encourage you, those of you who are in business, who are working somewhere, if you're an entrepreneur, we'd love your questions. We'd love to be able to answer those on the show. What challenges do you face? What things are you seeing that you're struggling with? Let us speak some life and some encouragement into that. You can comment on the feed here. You can also email us, info@uprint.life. But we want to recognize our corporate partners and thank them for making this possible. One of those being Chris Riley and the folks at Fountain Financial Associates. They have been giving clients and families a better life for more than 20 years, and they're in the business of keeping promises. If you need any financial advice or oversight from an investment standpoint, feel free to call Chris and the folks at Fountain Financial Associates, 910-256-8882. So Kev, diving into this faith and business construct, I know you had written something down there. I want to be able to kind of draw that out, let that kick off the conversation, something that business people wrestle with, struggle with, and then we'll kind of flow from there.
Sure. Well, I think one of the easiest areas to jump into a business environment is to just talk about the obstacles and the challenges. There's a lot of fear. And there are some rules that come from that fear. So, the rule is sort of the fruit of the fear. So you have this, and that turns into a culture, et cetera. Then it turns into a paradigm and a whole belief system just from a stupid fear.
Yeah.
And one of those fears is, well, there's a couple things I've got written down here just to jump in. We could go all over the place with it. But one of them that we've heard from people, we've even, when we're talking to some different, especially Christian-y type companies out there to do some sponsoring, one of the things we've heard, and we hear it regularly from people who are in this weird place, and that is, I don't want to alienate my clients. And a lot of people will say it, which is one level of integrity, I guess. Some people won't say it. Not only will they not engage it, they just act like it doesn't exist because they're so afraid to honor God before their clients.
Yeah.
So the other thing, and the flip side of that is, why are they like that? And what does it mean to live out your faith in your workplace? And a lot of people have this false idea that it's preaching from your desk or opening the Bible in your office chair and, putting the voodoo on people there. And it's just crazy. That's not it at all.
I have a picture, as you talk about this, I have a picture of like a family praying before a meal, right? And sure. I don't know that this makes sense to just follow this vision, this picture that God, I feel like, has given me. It's almost like me and my family choosing to be at dinner and to ask a blessing on our meal before we eat, right? But then going, oh, well, I don't want to offend the table next to me because of what their belief system is, so I'm not going to pray and give thanks to God for the meal that He's given us.
Yeah.
from a fear that it might offend them. Mm-hmm. But we've all done that. For those that are believers and have done that, you've been in an environment where you've chosen to say a prayer before a meal, mm-hmm. and you've had somebody come up to you and go, "Hey, I just noticed your family praying together before your meal. That was very mm-hmm. encouraging to me. Thank you." Mm-hmm. And the person who's an atheist next to you or whatnot, it's not like they go, "You're an idiot for praying before your meal." I mean, it's this fallacy in our head, mm-hmm. and what it does is it causes us to not be who we are. Mm-hmm. This isn't to say you got to pray before every meal if you're a Christian. I'm not saying that stuff. I'm just saying be who mm-hmm. you are. If you want to give thanks before a meal, mm-hmm. give thanks before a meal. Sure. You know, as a business person, you have to carry the integrity and character of Christ into what you do. Mm-hmm. Do that unashamedly, sure. and watch the blessing pour out instead of some kind of crazy fear making you be somebody that you're not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so just to kind of get it back into bullet form, so we've got the fear of alienating your clients with your faith, and then, you know, probably the other way to say this is the fear of offending or alienating the people you work with internally. So those are two big fears, and you know, so let's talk about what that means and what, you know, how to dispel it, overcome it, and how to actually live out your faith in the workplace from that perspective.
Yeah. Well, to me, I think an immediate first step is recognizing and being aware. If you're afraid of declaring your faith or living from that place, if you're afraid of doing that in a workplace, there is an issue there that needs to be addressed.
Sure.
I think that's the very first step, mm-hmm. is the ability and the humility to go, yeah, I feel that tension. Because a lot of people just say, well, I'd rather not talk about it. That's just whatever. I'm just going to kind of go, and I'm a good person, and you know, all the justifications instead of just being honest about the fact that, listen, I value my faith. I value people.
Sure.
And I want to be honest about that in everything that I do. Mm-hmm. So an awareness to me is kind of a first step.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, you need clarity, and it's always good to recalibrate your compass, to go back to the Word, to understand that leadership isn't just pointing to Scripture, it's recalibrating your life by it. And there's something pure in that that people who aren't Christians can even appreciate, versus, you know, someone who is carrying around a bunch of good behaviors that really don't have any root system. So if you're a believer and you want to operate your company from who you are, you can't separate that. You know, if it doesn't come from faith, it ain't from God. The Bible says sin. It's sin. So for example, when you hear people throw that thing up, well, I don't want to alienate my clients or my customers, like we've experienced when we say, look, we have a faith-based show, but we get real, and you know, it ain't religion, it's not theology, it's just real life experience trying to live out this thing. And you know, they have products and services that even speak from Scripture, but yet they won't do business with us because we are open about our faith. It's just crazy. So we see right there that immediate wall that people throw up. That is definitely a sign that your success isn't going to happen long term.
So is that person essentially, why would they do that? And the reason is they would do that because they value money and a client and this faux idea of alienating people, rather than standing on the gospel and potentially alienating that.
Well, it's not necessarily saying that people are just after the dollar. I think it's a lot of it is meant well, even though it's very hypocritical. When it comes from fear, but they don't. These people that talk this way and then act this way really don't know the depth of Scripture. For instance, if something, God hasn't given us the spirit of fear. Mm-hmm. If you want to operate your business in wisdom, then you can't operate from fear. So any decision made from fear is not wise. So these two things are incongruent. So when you're operating in fear, saying, I don't want to alienate, that's not really good stewardship. That's more fear-based. If you're afraid, and so why are they afraid? And that gets to this other thing, because they have this paradigm of this picture that's been ingrained in people. Mm-hmm. Can't do that, can't do that, can't do that. Well, you don't have to do that. You don't need to be a preacher on a desk.
Yeah.
It's not that.
Right.
Unless you're called to that.
Yeah. And you got to be honest about what it is, and we'll dive into that,
yes,
after this next segment. You're listening to and watching Matt Ham, Kevin Adams. We're the co-founders of Uprint, and this is Wake Up Our Faith in Business. We'll be back for more right after this. Hello, happy Wednesday. Welcome back to Wake Up Our Faith in Business. Matt Ham, Kevin Adams. We're the co-founders of Uprint, a faith and personal development organization right here in the wonderful city, the port city of Wilmington, North Carolina. We broadcast live every Wednesday from the Standard Glass Studios at Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7 FM. Nick Craig, brother Nick Craig, is up in the production booth today, shaking his head at me as he does most weeks. But Nick, thanks for putting up with us and making this all possible. Kev, we're diving into some great faith and business topics today, really addressing the obstacles that keep people from stepping into this. One of those being this kind of crazy fear of alienating my clients. Right, I don't want to alienate my clients.
Is that Matt Foley?
Alienate my clients. Woo-wee! Yeah, that'd be Matt Foley.
I dare you to just do a belly flop on the
flop on the table.
That'd be great. Gosh, it'd make my week.
If broke the TV, Nick would kill me.
Hurt your ribs.
Yeah, love some Matt Foley. I think there's this crazy fear that people have that if you do this, you'll alienate your clients. And where does that come from? Why do you even feel that way? And it's because we have this hijacked understanding of faith in business means like, Kevin, can I share with you John 3:16 passage here? That's what it looks like.
Yeah. Time out. Let's not talk about the service. Let's talk about the service. The sermon.
Oh, man. I love it.
They get country voices.
Why? Why do we do that?
Because we're from the South, and that's our, ugly roots.
It could be.
If we were from Brooklyn, it would probably be,
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah. Hey, youths.
Hey, youths.
Two youths.
Hey, youths, guys, come over here.
Come on, let's go, some of this.
Yeah, let's sprinkle some of that stuff over here.
I drank the holy water, by
That's
the way,
the problem.
in the Catholic Church. When I was a kid, I loved my Catholic friends. We got some really good friends. It's cool, right? But
it's like David eating the bread of the presence.
I was silly, and I didn't understand it. Of course, this is in my book, but I don't know what I'm thinking about. I was so dumb, man, as a kid, or maybe more curious. Right. And we used to play football in the Catholic Church area in their courtyard. We lived across the street from it. So I'd go in there in the middle of the day and look around. I only did it a few times, but one time I saw this big bowl, and I thought, man, I got to know what's in there. It's a big silver fountain bowl thing.
Only you, my friend.
You're supposed to sprinkle, it represents baptism, holy water, and that kind of stuff. So all due respect, but I drank it, man. I'm just like, give it to me.
As you can see here from Nick, the Catholic guy.
It's amazing that you drank that with all these people's hands in there and you're still living to this day, to be honest with you.
That's so true. Maybe that's why he's got this cough.
Yeah, that's right, man. It built my immunity. It's like, but anyway, just totally kidding and just with affection for Christians worldwide in different ways of worshiping. We go back to this idea of living out your faith doesn't mean opening up the scripture to your customer and saying, hey, can I get a gold star? Can I baptize you today or whatever? I mean, that if those days ever existed, they don't exist anymore.
The point is getting rid of those old perceptions. And that's why we use humor. That's why we pick. That's why we laugh.
Oh, yeah.
It's because it's intended to come underneath it and go, let's stir this pot a little bit.
Yeah.
We don't need to be so angry or
that's right.
This willingness to be offended on both sides of the aisle. You know what I mean? It's crazy to carry around these perceptions that this is some oppressive thing that's trying to take over the world. Like it's not at all. It's not at all. We just got to get honest about it and be willing to step into it. And so, Kev, we talk about this. It doesn't look like preaching from your desk. What it does look like is being excellent in what you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And at the very root of it, if you are I love honor to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It was his celebratory day on Monday. One of the greatest things that I have ever heard him say is that if you are a street sweeper, sweep streets as Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel. Mm-hmm. What he's saying is do what you do with excellence.
Sure.
And that makes God known.
Right.
And that's where our sentiments lie. Is there's something missing in American culture today about people who don't bring excellence into work because they have neglected the fact that they're called to excellence because of their identity as children of God.
Yeah, but this isn't a poster. We got somebody jumping over a cliff or, climbing a high wall or, whatever kind of motivational. This isn't that. This is being who you are, the base level, because God made you, and he didn't do it haphazardly. He did it with great intention. When you start adding up all the variables, time, circumstance, geography, people, all of that, you see it. You go, oh my gosh, God did this on purpose. That gives me purpose. And the greatest form of obedience is to live that out. And God will draw people to him through you being who you are with excellence. So all of that ties together. So it really takes the weight back off of you to try to act like Jesus to everybody.
Perform.
Fake, meaning well, and actually let Jesus out into the room through who you are. So it's a big difference between trying to strive to be like him versus just let him out.
Yeah. It reminds me of a conversation I had with a friend who's like, man, Matt, I love what you're talking about, what you guys are talking about. I love this idea, but I get intimidated sometimes because I don't know what to say to people, you know what I mean, when the opportunity comes up to share my faith. And I went back to the root cause and I said, man, listen, you don't live in that paradigm. Just be great, man. Just be you. You got a giant heart. So just go love on people. And all you need to do is somebody says, man, you always have joy with you. You're always great to people. Like, where does that come from? And say, it's just my faith in the Lord. He's been good to me, and I just want to bless others. This is that simple. You don't have to take them down the Romans road. You don't have to be able to pontificate theology. You don't have to be able to prove anything.
Right.
Because that's when we get into the posture of, well, I got to defend the faith. I got to be able to stand up. And no. Just be.
Yeah, more than conquerors means that you're able to take the punches and absorb them and keep standing back up with a smile. The blessing in that, or the fruit of that, we're vessels. God works through us. We don't produce fruit, we bear fruit. And so we do that by yielding. Now, there may be a time where God puts something on your heart and you have to share it with somebody.
Right.
That happens. But guess what? There's power and blessing and authority on that. It's anointed. That isn't to say that you need to try to figure that out. What I need to do is I need to be the best me to you in our relationship, and you'll see it. And it will take root, and it won't go away later. It's a house built on a rock, right?
Yeah.
And vice versa. That's what being a Christian really is. It starts there. God does the heavy lifting. We just have to do and honor who we are, who he made us to be. And that thing's already blessed.
Yeah.
It'll happen.
Just show up.
And that's why when we go back to a good example of in business, that Chick-fil-A isn't afraid to alienate their clients. They stand up for what they believe, but they're not pushing Scripture on you.
Yeah, there's a plaque on the wall that says, here's why we aren't open on Sundays. They talk about values. They give credit where credit's due to God for blessing it. All that stuff.
And there's a line outside their building. I mean, for people, look at that example over here and just see it. Why are people lined up? Because they make great chickens. It's excellent, right?
Yes.
They are who they are. Truett Cathy just did what God put on his heart.
Mm-hmm.
Honor this guy. But people still aren't even coming there for that. They're coming there because it's good. And they get that good service and those smiles. And they're real. They're taught that. All of that is built on Holy Spirit-led stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, listen, if
there's no fear in it.
Yeah, if God's for you, who can be against you?
Exactly.
And that is the corporations that are willing to stand up to that.
Right.
And to say, we're going to live this way. This is our culture. This is our place. I think about Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey's one of them. Dave Ramsey is an on-air personality for the station here at 106.7. Mm-hmm. My cousin actually just went to work with him, and he says they're unashamed about the heart underneath the ministry and the organization. But they walk with all different types of people who are navigating financial difficulties. This is the new era
it is.
Of how we're called to live and express ourselves in business.
Yeah, it's a soundbite world. The attention, any of that kind of stuff gets, it's not the 60s or the 50s. We live in a world where everything's diluted because there's overabundance of information. So how do you cut through that? You know who you are, and you let Jesus out through that.
Yeah. Fantastic thoughts today, guys, on the Faith in Business Hour here. Wake up our faith in business. Matt Ham, Kevin Adams. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back for more right after this. Hello, welcome back to Wake Up Our Faith in Business. Matt Ham, Kevin Adams, joining you live from the Standard Glass Studios at Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7 FM. We're here every Wednesday. First hour is dedicated to faith topics to navigate life between Sundays. Second hour is how does this apply to business? This is where we spend the majority of our time. We've got to break down these walls that exist between faith and business and get over the excuses of why we're not using our everyday work lives as an opportunity to evangelize, which is not preaching from the desk, but it's just being excellent, being great, being who you're created to be. Love people like Jesus.
Right.
You know, it's funny. I was getting my hair cut. You see that? I don't have a hat on today. I got my hair cut.
Patagonia.
The mop.
I was hoping to climb Patagonia. You had this hat on, and you know you're tall, so
not now. Not now.
It was like a 2-story deal.
The big giant hat.
Sorry, man.
2-story Matt.
I liked it. I'm teasing you.
But
Glad you got a cut. I got to do the same thing. So
I got one. I needed one, but I was at the barbershop salon, whatever you want to call it, you know, and I overheard someone talking a few chairs down, and she was talking about someone. I don't know who she was talking about to this day, but she said, this person she's almost not real to me. And I'm thinking, like, what is she talking about? She's like, this person's the kindest person I've ever met. It said she literally is like an angel on this planet. And she's not talking about how well this person preached to her. She's saying there's something magnetic about this woman that I absolutely adore. She doesn't even seem human to me. She's the kindest person I've ever met. And all she was talking about is how this person treated her and how she treated other people. And she was so inspired by this woman. And I can guarantee you that if the opportunity presented itself, this woman would talk about where that comes from. And so this is a tangible example, as people will not talk about how well you preach to them. They'll talk about, we say this often, is how you make them feel.
That's right.
And so that's where we have to become consumed with, as Christians in the workplace, carrying a different torch.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of adages, you know, actions speak louder than words and all that. And you got to be careful trying to pendulum to one thing or another and just let God's Spirit work through you organically. It's like the homeless person you see on the corner. There's sometimes where God just stops you, and you just know, even though logically you probably shouldn't, you just have to help them. And there's other times you go, I know I should, but I feel like I'm not supposed to. I need to pass them up. Maybe there's some danger or whatever. So we have to let God navigate. But I think that's a great example, and we're talking about different sort of adjectives like excellence, how we describe the fruit. Mother Teresa is a great example. This lady lived this out, so now she's a hero or a heroine, I guess. So that said, what did she do? Well, she never backed off of truth. So, meeting people where they are, you hear that kind of thrown around. Well, I got to meet them where they are. Well, what you have to do is not, you have to be who you are, and that will speak to them. That's the first level. And then beyond that, you have to be kind or careful in the sense of your delivery and your tone and all that. You withhold judgment, but do not withhold truth. And that's where people get off base on this. They hold back from truth, and they betray themselves and God in micro form, and the whole thing goes south ultimately. So.
We had a great thought from Melissa Thomas, one of our listeners here, and she said, it's interesting that people would say, I don't want to alienate my clients, but they would willingly alienate God.
Absolutely.
And that's that
Amen.
wall. That's that wall that exists where, if you get honest about it, saying you're going to try to alienate somebody if you start playing that card instead of just saying, I'm being honest, I'm going to bring truth.
Right.
Kevin, one of the things that you've always said, and kind of a parallel to this encouragement here, is just be wheat.
Yes.
Be wheat. Be goodness in the world.
Right.
The sower sowed wheat into the field. The enemy sowed weeds into the field.
Right.
And so I think a lot of times the paradigm here is that if we're going to be good Christians, then we have to point out the weeds.
Yeah.
We have to call people out on their, shortcomings and failures. And there's some nobility in being this, wheat lord, like the lord of the wheat,
right?
Where you're just condemning everybody for being the weeds instead of just being excellent, being wheat, and letting God do what he does, which is judge and separate and all of that.
Yeah, we're picking all the wrong arguments. You got 2 hands, right? Not 3, but 2. Unless you're weird, right? Anyone who has 3, I want to see it. Come on over. But the way God showed me to use this in teaching is, we're not talking about corporate environment, church, bringing someone before the elders and all that crap. I mean, that's scriptural, but people take it out of context and turn it into something it shouldn't be. What I'm talking about is you got 2 hands. This is essentially relational every day. One to point at your own sin, my own sin, and the other to point at my Redeemer. Now, that's the best medicine there is for staying in that place. The other side of that is when you are living out from who you actually are, it's already blessed.
Yeah.
You can rest in it, and they will see God. So you don't have to argue or somebody struggling with this sin or another, or set all that aside a minute. Remember that God loves this person, created them. There is genius in them. So get away from the arguments, see them the way God does, and start there and be excellent in who you are. If you're a hammer or screwdriver, just be that to start, and the kingdom will work through that. And it's so powerful. The best thing is, it's a long-term investment, and you're not trying to cram it in, drive through Christianity. That doesn't work.
For many years, when I was in the insurance business, again, and I'm sharing this as a testimony. Glory and credit goes to the Lord. When I was in the insurance business for years, I felt a tension because I'm a believer, I'm a Christian, and you're in an environment where you see people and situations and circumstances that just aren't God-honoring, period. And you feel this vindication sometimes to go, this is not right.
Yeah.
This is not right. And sometimes when you're in an intimate relationship and someone asks you to participate in something, you're saying, no, I'm not going to do that, and if they bug you about why, you can just tell them why. But, you're not there to call out. You're just called to be light. And so for years, I always felt guilty that I didn't share my faith while I was working at this organization.
Sure.
And what's happened since I've left is people are beginning to connect with me, come back around, and just say stuff like, man, I knew when you were here that there was something about you, that you carried yourself differently. I'm navigating something challenging right now, and I would like to talk to you about it. And I use that as an example because it honors God, I believe. And that's the kind of environment that we want to cultivate, is if you carry yourself in a way that honors Him, if you live with integrity, if you live with the empathy, vulnerability, and humility that we talked about, God has a way of attracting people to Himself. And then that's when you have the opportunity to step in.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not about good behavior. Otherwise, David wouldn't be a hero, and Saul would be. I mean, Saul had a minor failure, and David had major failure. But David's heart, David understood God's role in his life. Saul thought he was God, sort of like, or we're partners in this, and it's just crazy backwards. So coming from the right place, in that kind of thing, being consistent, living this out, not consistently good behavior.
Yes.
Consistently having a pure heart. There's a difference there.
Yeah.
So this wasn't about your good behavior at this place. That's fruit. And also being vulnerable enough to not hide your failures. All of that shows a genuine Christ-like spirit. And so when people do betray, or they squash, or they create damage, God always vindicates. Now, we've been at this a long time, my wife and I, and we see vindication always come back. It always does. And we're not looking for it in that way. We're looking for it so people will see, even the thief needs to see Jesus.
Yeah.
If he's stealing money from you and you just give him money, he'll see Jesus in that. So yes, be wheat is a what do you do for a generation that calls evil good and good evil? You just do good. You just do good. You just be wheat. You don't have to yank the tares up.
Yeah.
So in business.
Yeah, well, and that's a great word for us as we navigate this, and for those that are listening, watching, is just be wheat. Be the good news. Be excellent. Carry God with you. Just let him out into the room. It's not about behavior. It's just about that kind of willing heart.
Yes.
And that's what we see in Scripture. That's what we get to emulate in life. Guys, we have one more segment. You're listening to, watching Wake Up Our Faith in Business. We'll be back right after this. Hello, and welcome back to Wake Up Our Faith in Business. Matt Ham, Kevin Adams, kicking off the final segment here in today's show. This is a 2-hour program every single Wednesday that's live streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Rebroadcast every Sunday on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7 FM. First hour is dedicated to faith topics to help you navigate life between Sundays, grow and strengthen your faith so you can step into the life of impact you were created for. Second hour is dedicated to doing that in business context. So we use business language, business scenarios, examples, because this is where we spend our time. Kevin, this is a fantastic conversation today about overcoming the obstacles to living out your faith in business. Before we jump into the final segment, I want to make sure we recognize our corporate partners, the businesses that invest in and support what we do. We, in turn, invest in and support them. One of those being Chris Hutchins and his team at Guaranteed Rate Mortgage. Chris has more than 20 years experience in the mortgage business. Whether you're buying a home, refinancing, make sure you give Chris and his team a call, 910-344-0304, and check out their new offices over PT's Grill right off of Military Cutoff. Also, too, Century 21 Swalyer and Associates. This is our exclusive real estate partner. More than 30 years in the real estate business here in southeastern North Carolina, Carolina's largest and most successful Century 21 agency. Give Jeff and his team a call if you're looking to buy, sell a home, or if you have an interest in getting into the real estate business, 910-256-0021. So, Kev, we've talked today a lot about the obstacles that exist for us as Christians, as people who profess Christ and carrying that into the workplace, namely the fear of alienating our clients, which, if we're honest about it, is rooted in some old perception, and it's rooted in this kind of jacked up concept of, whatever, that if you, number one, you're supposed to preach from your desk, but number two, if you do this, that everybody's going to run away. You're going to lose everything, all that kind of junk.
Right.
And it's just not true. It's just not real. These are obstacles that exist that we have to get beyond and begin seeing this and living it from a different perspective.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so we talked about a couple of different fears: fear of alienating your clients, in the idea that you go into your office or your environment or your client base, or, the world is flat now. And I'm not talking about literally. I'm saying the world, it's simplified, it's global. We can connect. So big companies and little guys can compete with one another, which is great. It's also a great place for us to step in with our faith. But living that out, when you put up immediate barriers, especially that old school crap that people have been saying for years, you automatically undercut your legs. I mean, you just take them right out from under you when you say, well, can't talk politics and faith. What? Wait a second. So don't start there. Start with, your quiet time with the Lord and all that stuff, and carry that into that environment. So looking at the obstacles, two simple ones are alienating your clients, and the fear of that, and feeling like you're going to alienate or preaching from the desk, the environment you're in, the people you actually work with, regular contacts, etc. So anyway,
well, the thing I'm sitting here asking an honest question: if do you want the authority of God on your business or not? I think that's a simple starting point.
Sure.
If you believe in God, would you want His authority and blessing on your business or not?
Sure.
And again, you get to choose whether or not you receive that by inviting Him into it. Sure. And by naturally building a wall and putting Him in a box, inadvertently you're keeping His authority and His blessing out of the thing where you're spending most of your time. And so in a very simplistic kind of way, is that something that you're willing to step into? And I feel like that it's such a struggle because of the old perceptions, but our heart is to help people wake up to that it's not. And so, Kev, for you, for the business person out there who's hungry, who's willing, who's ready to kind of step into this, where would you, we've talked about just being who God created you to be and letting Him out. Like, where would be a tangible, actionable step for someone like this that is wanting to begin to navigate this?
Well, look, I've seen people come to the Lord right before they've died, and I've been able to be a participant in that. And I'm talking people that are 20 years old and 60-something years old and all in between. And I'm telling you, what works is trusting God, not some program or unprogram. So we've got to improve our listening skills. In other words, if you want to follow God, if you want to remove the risk, learn His voice and, know His word. That's personal, right? That's something you could start with. it will automatically carry itself into business through wisdom, through excellence, and all these different things. Now, that sounds like pie in the sky. Remember this, and excuse me, I'm still dealing with the sniffles, pardon the sniffing, but Romans 11:29, this is something God's really been putting on me lately over and over again. We have our own way of saying it, but the word says, for God's gifts and his calling are irrevocable. It means what God put in you cannot be revoked. And, you know, kind of the way that God helps me display that in business or wherever over the years is, and how we talk about it now is, your U-print is something no one can ever take away from you.
Yeah.
Who you are, who you were in the womb, not your name when you're 6, not your college thing, and not your parenting or your career. Those are great things. But who you are starts and finishes with who God is in you. And that's who he made you to be. It's irrevocable. So if you already know that going into it, it's like knowing who's going to win the game. Would you watch the game? You don't need to watch. You need to go on and step into it because you're going to win. So that takes away the pressure to pontificate or whatever. Again, it starts in that moment of being absolutely pure-hearted before God and then letting him work through you. That doesn't sound practical, but dadgum, man, it is practical. Yeah. It's very simple. It has to be, you have to have courage and be honest about it, right? And clarify. But I don't need to go into the office and have a game plan. And my plan is God. That's it. And he will work through that. And it's so funny, over and over, you see different weird, crazy opportunities to speak into somebody's life when they're ready to listen.
Yeah.
And through your actions or even your words. It's beautiful. But we see examples, and maybe another way to look at it is to call out some examples. We mentioned Mother Teresa. You know, she's really highly regarded by anyone, Hollywood people, anyone. They're not saying, well, she's a Christian. We don't like Christians. You know, she didn't argue about homosexuality and all these things. She just did. She just lived it out.
Is that part of the problem? That we're trying to jump into issues and begin to argue and defend?
Yeah,
and
I think it is.
Yeah.
We're not saying we support these things. What we're saying is these are not, why argue this? We're not going to change people or they're going to change. It's just a waste of time.
Yeah.
Be who you are. And God will work through that, and he will draw people to him. God does the healing, you know, and we all need it in one way or another. So.
It's interesting that the stand up on your desk and preach perception is kind of the cousin to the call everybody out perception.
Yeah, it is.
Stand up for your faith. You know,
it is.
I got into a interesting text conversation with somebody the other day, and they say, "Don't deny me before men," is what they were texting to me. You know, and I was like, "Listen, there's a difference of a heart that wants to deny Christ out of fear, and then one that's just being. It's going to wait for the opportunity.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you can idolize, you know, saying Jesus' name as much as you can idolize the fear of if you do what it's going to mean. I mean, I hope that makes sense.
If you use pure logic and soulish thinking, and, you know, you can argue it by logic. You can say, well, I wasn't denying Jesus. That was Jesus. Yeah. I mean, whatever. It's not about that. Yes, Jesus' name is powerful, and we need to hold on to that. Very big deal for us. Just like saying the Lord's name in vain in a derogatory way is evil. It's not a good practice. God forgive you? Yes, but saying the F word and, you know, other things, who cares? I mean, really, socially, you shouldn't, maybe.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to God.
Yeah, don't put so much pressure on the behavior. Let's put the pressure on the heart, right? That's what he looked at anyway. Right. Guys, thanks so much for joining us for another week here on Wake Up Our Faith in Business. Matt Ham, Kevin Adams. You guys be well. Want to encourage you to check out the Portable Faith Community. This is the way you can get plugged in, get content right to your device each weekday morning. WakeUpMyFaith.com. See you next Wednesday.